Spit bars, I stand behind mine. Yeah. Sentences I serve, maximize guidelines. My lawyer can't give me his advice when these beasts that I murder carry mandatory minimums of life. Yikes. In case you didn't get the point, we spit bars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The Maximum Sentence, where there's conviction behind the bars. I'm your man, AJ Throwback. Great to be here with you on another awesome Wednesday, where we are finishing up our breakdown of my latest single, Jason's Lyric, featuring Michael Jalil. But before we go any further, if this is your first time checking out any of my content on YouTube, please make sure that you like, comment, share, and of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hit that bell notification so whenever I go live, post a new video, premiere a new video, you'll be among the first to know. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get to some of our comments from some of our Maximum Sentence faithful. So the first two comments actually come from her_me the queen on Instagram. She says this is in response to a snippet from the last episode of the Maximum Sentence where she said, "My children were out of wedlock, but I wasn't, and I can tell the difference." And when I asked her what specifically she noticed the difference was, she said, "My demeanor more peaceful." So I definitely appreciate that comment and just really being honest about that. The next comment comes from my brother, the real_A_Ali on Instagram. He said, "I feel you, bruh, 8 million. And so I definitely appreciate you, my brother. And please make sure that y'all tap in with this brother. He makes some dope music. I made this connection with him through Air It Out Radio. Shout out to Air It Out Radio, who's playing both Chasing Maria and Jason's Lyric. Making a lot of connections through that show, so much appreciated. The next comment comes from another person that I met through Air It Out Radio, OG the Queen. She said, "Say it would have been hell, huh? Baby mama drama," with the crying, laughing emojis. I'm trying to tell you, if it would have been either one of them two, it would have been a problem. So thank God you knew better. But I appreciate you for commenting, Queen. And the last comment comes from my sis, Ansley Jukebox Joy. She commented on YouTube at the 654 mark of the last episode of the Maximum Sentence. She said, "Oh my goodness, facts." And that is in response to something that I said regarding the whole thing about how there's always this big deal about abortion being such a bad thing and how it's killing children or getting rid of children, but nobody really talks about how masturbation and wasted seed is also a way that really keeps children from possibly coming into the world. So I definitely appreciate your comment as always and all of your support, my sister. And thanks to everybody for your continued support of this single, Jason's Lyric, featuring Michael Jalil, which if you don't have, please make sure that you go to my website, BAMMLLC.net/music, or you can go to my Bandcamp page if you're a Bandcamp person, and that is ajthrowback.bandcamp.com. And of course, that single is backed with Rolling Blackout. So let's go ahead and get into this third verse of Jason's Lyric. This is a part where I basically address my fears. I talk about it leading up to the third verse. I kind of sort of cover some ground in the second verse, but here is where I really kind of sort of get into it. So one of the parts, I start off the verse saying, "I often thought when I'd hear about you coming, I'd get a nooses worth full of knots in my stomach. Look up like, come on, you really think I'm able? I barely keep enough of me and Beeb on the table." So really the key line in this particular set of bars, I wanted to read all four because it was necessary to kind of sort of set up that fourth bar, where I say, "I barely keep enough of me and Beeb on the table." One of the biggest things that was a deterrent for me when it came to wanting to have kids or rushing to have kids was money. I was always worrisome about not having enough around because frankly, both my wife and I, we grew up in circumstances where money wasn't necessarily one of those things that was just floating around and just laying around, or there was an abundance of money just to do whatever. Money held us both back with a lot of different things. I mean, I could go into specific situations of my own. I always think about, there was this one time in the 7th grade that I wanted to go on this cross-country trip. And it seemed like all of my friends got to go. And to this day, whenever people talk about 7th grade. Whether it was people in my homeroom, people in other homerooms that I ended up becoming friends with once I went to high school, because a lot of us ended up at the same high school. A lot of these people still to this day talk about how legendary that cross-country trip was. So the cross-country trip, of course, was from DC to California, and they took the train, I believe, and everything. And I felt so left out because my mother couldn't afford to do that. She was a single mother at the time. My father didn't really have a dependable job, and he was dealing with a lot of his own personal struggles. And so he was really unable to assist financially. And so it left my mother to really fend for herself and do what she could on a teacher's assistant salary. This is before she actually became a teacher in 1998. She was still a teacher's assistant. And a teacher's assistant salary at that time, I'm sure my mom won't mind me sharing her salary. I never forget looking at, we had to do a free lunch application. And I never forget seeing how much she made. And she made at that time we're talking like between 1991 and 1994 when I went to Jefferson Junior High School. I never forget looking at that application and seeing that my mom made $22,000. And I didn't really understand salaries at that time at 12, 13, 14 years old. But I understood that wasn't a lot of money. And it really put a lot of things into perspective for me in terms of what my mother had to deal with, how my mother had to struggle. I was kind of thinking about this the other day. Like, I'm really a numbers guy. Numbers make sense to me. When you put it in the context of numbers, I understand it better a lot of times. And that was one of those situations where seeing the number in terms of how much my mom was making, where we were living, the fact that she had to take care of 2 boys, not just one, 2 boys living in Southeast DC at the time, I had a bigger respect for my mother and what she had to deal with. And so knowing that that's what my mother had to deal with. And then also, like I said, knowing the things my wife went through with, her family. And like I said, money not necessarily growing on trees. That was something that I was concerned about. I didn't want my son to struggle, or my child to struggle in the same ways that either their mother or I dealt with when we were kids. We always wanted to make sure that our kid or kids had better than we had more than we had, didn't have to worry about wearing Bobos to school, or didn't have to worry about where a meal was coming from. Now granted, I never really worried about where a meal was coming from, but my wife had to deal with that. And so because of our different experiences that were shared in a lot of different ways, we wanted to make sure that our kid had the best of everything. If our kid wanted to go wherever, do whatever, have whatever, they didn't necessarily have to worry about that in the same ways that we did. And so that's really where that fear came from for me, in terms of like, I don't want to be broke. I don't want to feel like, I got to rob Peter to pay Paul. And that's not to say that I don't go through that now. I do. As I'm saying this, like, it's kind of a struggle right now. But at the same time, we make sure that our son has. Perfect example when it comes to that. Our son, he had a birthday recently. And we were all dealing with a certain situation in our household, but it was one of those things where I made sure I set aside a certain amount of money, and I do this every single year. I make sure I set aside a certain amount of money so that our son has a great birthday celebration, because birthdays are important, and he's getting to the point where he remembers his birthdays. So although we weren't really able to go anywhere, he still was able to have an enjoyable birthday, a memorable birthday, and that was very important to us. Another thing, we were concerned, specifically my wife. I mean, I was concerned about it too, but we were concerned with the fact that our son might not go to school with a new pair of shoes, because, it's a thing. I don't know whether it's black culture or whether it's just culture period in America, but you always want to send your kid to school in a new pair of shoes. And not just any pair of shoes. Like, you can look at a pair of shoes and know it's a first day of school pair of shoes. And so it was this whole ordeal of going to PG Plaza. And when I tell you, we sat in a store for a long time, like me and my wife, we were over the phone like, hey, we gotta make sure that like it's not just any pair. So we ended up getting a pair, but it was a matter of where we were going to get the money. So, you know, I had to shift a few things around. I had to honestly ask my mom for some help. But it was one of those things where it was like, we didn't want our child to go through any kind of traumatic experience where he gets made fun of or whatever it might be. And you could call it a casualty of black culture. You could call it whatever. But we weren't going to let our son go to school with the same pair of shoes that, you know, he had been wearing since last year, because we've gone through it. I've gone through it. I'll never forget having the pair of K-Swiss that we got at Jefferson. I think I wore them pair of K-Swiss to a couple of first days of school. It wasn't all the time that I had a new pair of shoes on the first day of school. And I didn't really think it was important when I was a kid. But at the same time, it's like understanding, you know, what my wife has gone through, understanding what a lot of kids have gone through. We don't want our son to have to really suffer because of money being an issue. So that's that particular set of lines. Then we skip ahead a little bit to where I say, and Lord, I ain't perfect. How can I be a model? Afraid I'll either be too hard or a coddle. That's the balance of being a Libra, is that a lot of times, you know, I've gotten the harsh side and I've gotten the soft side. You know, my dad was maybe a little bit harsher than my mom, if I'm being honest. My mom had her times where she could give you a tongue lashing. Well, my dad was definitely the one that was a little bit more stern. So I get a little bit of both from my parents. But a lot of times it's easy for me to lean a little bit too much into the whole realm of being a disciplinarian, because it's the whole thing of fathers train their sons, love their daughters, mothers train their daughters, love their sons. And it's not to say that you don't love, like as a father, I don't love my son. I absolutely love my son. I would do anything for him. But it's a whole thing of a huge amount of my job as his father is to make sure that he understands that there's a certain way of doing things. He has to understand what it means to be a man. Like, he has to get these examples from me. And sometimes when it comes to whether, you know, like one of the things about my son is he's very hard-headed. And, you know, I can't even sit here and say I don't know where it comes from. To be honest, he get a little bit of both from, you know, me and my wife, to be honest. Like, I can be very stubborn with a lot of different things. And I see that in him. And sometimes I have to rein it in and say, you know what, Joe, you was like that a lot of times. Certain things, your mother had to tell you things multiple times, or your dad had to tell you things multiple times. So don't have too short of a memory, you know. But then there were a lot of things my mom and my dad didn't have to tell me multiple times, especially when it came to things that really protected me, that really helped me. Because I ain't gonna lie, like, I was kind of a scared kid with certain things. So it was like, I didn't want to get in trouble. I didn't want to get hit by a car. I didn't want to put myself in danger or put somebody I know in danger. So if it had to do with things like that, I would listen. But my son, you know, on the other hand, you could tell him that fire is hot, it could burn your hand, and he gonna still try to test it because it's like he don't believe you. You know what I mean? It's a matter of balancing the line, or walking the fine line between how do I make this a teachable moment without coming down too hard on him. And a lot of times I think many of us as parents, whether fathers or mothers, you know what I'm saying, because there are a lot of mothers who can be stern disciplinarians, whether it's a boy or a girl. And it's a matter of, okay, what do you need in this moment? And that's what I've had to learn as a father. What does this moment require? Does it require me lecturing you? Does it require me being a little bit softer in my approach? Does it require me letting you have it? Because sometimes you gotta let your kids have it. You can be nice and you can be kind and you can be this and you can be that. But if it's certain situations where you feel like you are a broken record, sometimes you gotta drive the point home a little bit differently. You know, I've had situations even recently where I had to really get my sons behind about some things. And I felt bad about it after the fact, but at the same time, he knew not to try me. He knew not to try his mother to that degree, or try to flex like that. Because there has to be the understanding that I am the parent, you are the child. There has to be a certain level of respect. I'm going to respect you as my child, but you have to respect me as your parent. That has to be an understanding. And it's a matter of knowing when to go a little bit harder and when to be a little bit softer, So that fear of afraid I'll either be too hard on them or I'll coddle. It's been an ongoing struggle because, to be honest, he's my first child. So I'm still learning on the fly. He's adjusting. He's getting older. So I can't approach him in the same way at 8 years old now that I would have at 3 years old or 18 months old. I can't approach him the same way because he's growing. He's developing more of a personality. And he's also getting to the point where he's smelling himself a little bit. So the flex got to be a little bit different. But at the same time, it's got to be a thing where he understands that, look, I love you, but at the same time, this is what I expect of you. Like that whole thing of you're this amount, of you're this old or you're that old, that stuff ain't gonna fly but so long. Like you're getting to the point where now you know better. So then I get ahead to the part where I say, what about my music? Am I selling my equipment? I rarely have the time when he's crawling around and limping. I don't want to resent him. He never asked to be. So that's me, continuing to talk to God in that moment. And that was a fear of mine too, was that, okay, I have this child. I've already sacrificed my room, what I thought was going to be my music room, for this boy. Because I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but when my wife and I, when we moved here to Silver Spring, we didn't know we were expecting at the time. Like we saw this apartment, fell in love with this apartment, and knew we wanted to move in this area. We loved the area and everything. So I assumed when we were moving into this new spot that bedroom was going to be my studio. And then maybe some days later, maybe even a day later, my wife said, I'm pregnant. And I was like, wow. And then in that instant, I knew. I was like, okay, well, that means that room that was going to be my studio is no longer my studio. So what I realized was that the closet was big enough for me to fit in and fit my music in. So I had to actually build my workstation where I produce my music. I had to build my workstation into the closet because the desk that I bought wouldn't fit if you just slid it into the closet. I had to take the parts, build the parts in the closet. So I already have this small amount of space to make my music compared to when we lived at Ridgecrest Court in Southeast. I had this big old bedroom basically to myself to do my music. I mean, if I wanted to have a DJ setup, if I wanted to have everything, my speakers, everything, I could have had everything in that one room and still had plenty of space in that room. Here, not quite the same story. So it's the whole thing of giving up time. Like I had to give up time in order to help him to grow, in order to help him develop. I had to sacrifice some things in order to pour into this new life who's learning the world. And so there were plenty of times, especially when he was a baby, where I didn't have as much time to work on music. But as he's gotten older, as he's developed his own regimen and things that he's into, some of the stuff includes music, some of it doesn't. And he's a lot more independent than he was when he was a baby, when he was a toddler. It gets easier to do music. But then there are other responsibilities that are involved, like, making sure that he does what he needs to do with school, making sure that he does what he needs to do around the house. He's older now, so he wants to do more things. He wants to go more places. He wants to have more fun. And so I have to accommodate. So it's a give and take as he gets older. But I've never felt like I can't do music because I'm a father. I don't feel like there's anybody who's a musician who's an artist, who's a creative, I don't feel like anybody can really say they can't still do some form of creativity or some form of music, being a father, being a mother. It's a matter of really balancing out your time in a lot of ways, unless you got like a rack of kids, and that's different. And you don't really have any help to do it, you know. But if you have the help, if you have the resources, you know, and in my case, I'm very fortunate because I'm married, and, you know, my wife is very understanding with a lot of things that I want to do. I'm very understanding with a lot of things that she wants to do. And, you know, we balance it out, and we've gotten even better at that when it comes to balancing out our time and respecting each other's passions and pursuits, and balancing that all around our son and making sure that he has enough time, that he feels like he's loved, that he's being paid attention to, and all of that. Now, I'm not as productive when it comes to creating as I used to be because I don't have as much time as I used to have. But that doesn't mean that I give up my passion, or that doesn't mean that I stop doing it altogether. And it's important that I don't, because it's important for my son to see that just because I'm a father, or just because I have these responsibilities, doesn't mean that I can't love you and still love my music and love your mother. We get to the next part. This is one of the most key parts of the song. This and the last set of lines that I'm gonna get into. So this is me saying what God said to me when he said, I chose you to father him. And though you didn't father them, I molded you a certain way so you could potter him. Those lines are very important because it goes back to the whole thing of basically, why me? Why did you choose me? And why did you choose me to be a father to him, this child, this special bright light of a child? And it's a matter of, when it comes down to it, God knows what he's doing every single time. You could think you're not the right person for the situation because of whatever's in your past, or whatever's been holding you back, or you feel like you're not a perfect person. Going back to the, and Lord, I ain't perfect. How can I be a model? I've made many mistakes being my son's father that I'm not proud of. As a family man, I have not lived up to a lot of the vows that I promised to live up to my wife. I've modeled certain behavior in front of my son that isn't something that I'm proud of, or something that I can celebrate, or something that I can hang my hat on. There have been questions about certain things that my son has brought to me, or things that he's said that I'm like, if I would have never done that, then my son would never have to ask me about that. And it makes me feel like, why me? Why'd you choose me, God? And when it comes down to it, it's a matter of, okay, you made mistakes. You made colossal mistakes. You made mistakes that could have potentially broken up your family. But I had to humble you in the process. I had to make you understand that it's not just about you. It's not just about your desires. It's not just about what you want out of life. It's not just about how you might have felt wronged in certain situations, or you might have felt slighted, or you might have felt overlooked, or whatever. It is about that boy. It is about giving him something better than you ever had. And it's not just a money thing. It's not just a time thing. It's not just the surface stuff. You got to give him something more than what you got spiritually, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. You have to pour into him in a way that you have never poured into anybody in your entire life, and might not have been poured into you to certain degrees, especially the father-son relationship, because my mother gave me everything that I needed from a mother. She gave me everything I needed. My father, on the other hand, I love my father. I celebrate my father. But he could have done better. But he was working with the best of what he had, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, financially. Most things, he wasn't physically there, but he was doing the best that he possibly could. I wanted to do better. I didn't consistently do better for a very long time, but I had to learn that process, and I had to learn that lesson the hard way. I feel like God chose me and allowed me to make the mistakes that I made in order for my son to understand redemption, to understand what it looks like, and understand redemption in a way where you see redemption happen quicker. I saw redemption happen with my dad, but a lot of that redemption happened toward the end of his life. Whereas my son gets to see a lot of my redemption, a lot of my maturity and growing up and putting my family first. He gets to see that so much sooner than what I got to see. When it comes down to it, and this is a conversation I was having with my aunt over the weekend, was with every generation, it should always be a leveling up. If you're not leveling up, you're failing your kids. That's just really the skinny of it. And for a very long time, I was getting to that point where I was failing my son. But I decided, no. This ends here with me. This cycle ends here with me. Not gonna happen. So then we wrap up with some of the last lines of the song where I say, "'Cause as much as you're in training, so am I. And neither one of us succeeds if your leader doesn't try. I'll mess up for sure. I'll screw up for certain, but I'll bear the brunt of pain if it means you're rarely hurting." And this really connects to everything that I just said. And Lord, I ain't perfect. How can I be a model? And also, I chose you to father him. And though you didn't father them, I molded you a certain way so you could powder him. This brings everything all together in the sense of my son is being groomed to be a part of the world, a productive member of society, to be a great man in whatever field that he chooses to be in, to be a great husband one day, to be a great father one day. I'm grooming him for all of these different things. But in the process of him learning, I'm also learning as well. I'm learning how to be a father. I'm always learning how to be a father. I'm always relearning how to be a father. Yeah, I could have mastered being a father when my son was 1, 2, 3, but he's not the same person at 8 years old. He's a totally different person. His personality has developed more. His opinions have developed more. His rights, or what he feels like are his rights, he's getting to that point where he feels like, well, I think this or I think that. And it's a matter of, okay, well, I can't just say because I'm your father, I know everything or I know best. It has to go a little bit deeper than that. It's like, why do you know best? Why is it this, why is it the case in this situation? And a lot of times it's very easy for us as parents to say, because I said so. In a lot of ways, it is because I said so. But in a lot of other ways, it's like, yeah, but you got to dig a little bit deeper. You have to understand that your child is evolving. And as your child evolves, you have to evolve with your child. You have to do things differently as your child does things differently. But the key is to continue to try, to continue to put in the effort. There are no days off from parenthood. None. Even if you think you got a day off, it's never a day off. You're constantly teaching. You're constantly speaking life into your child. And I don't even mean beyond the point from when they're first born to when they turn 18. My mom, my dad were teaching me lessons beyond that point of turning 18, beyond the point of me graduating from college. I was still learning lessons from them, but they had to react to me differently, or they had to treat me differently because I was an adult at a certain point. So they couldn't talk to me a certain way, but at the same time, they still had to establish that respect level. Like, I'm still the parent. Regardless of how old you are, I'm going to respect you as an adult, but you still need to respect me and regard me as your parent, the one who brought you into this world, the one who taught you so much of what you know, the one who protected you, the one who guided you, the one who provided for you. You still need to respect that line. And that's a huge amount of what I am grooming my son to be. But I have to put in the effort. I have to say, you know what? I know this is difficult for the both of us. You're learning, I'm learning. But in order for you to continue to put your best foot forward, I have to put even more steps forward in order to teach you, in order to groom you, in order to prepare you for what this world is going to deal you. Because it's going to deal you a specific hand, especially because you a young black boy. We got to groom our kids differently as black parents, but specifically black fathers with sons. We have to groom our kids differently. But it's also giving ourselves enough grace to say, we're going to mess up because there's no manual for this thing. We're going to slip up. We're going to do things that are imperfect. But one of the greatest things that we can show our kids is how we respond in situations where we do mess up. How we respond in situations where we might not always show the greatest level of kindness, the greatest level of understanding, the greatest amount of grace that we could show our children. Is how do we recover from those situations? Or we might not model ourselves in front of our kids the way that we should model ourselves. But how do we recover from that? How do we do better? And how do we protect our children from making similar mistakes? The bottom line is you can't keep your kid from making mistakes. You can't keep your kid from learning things the hard way because they are going to want to learn things in their own manner. And you have to let them do it sometimes. There's only so much protection that you can give a child after a while, especially as they get older, because they think they know so much. They think they know better than you at a certain point. I haven't gotten to that point with my son completely, even though there's a lot of times where he think he really does know better than me and his mother. But at the same time, he learns the hard way. And the bottom line is sometimes you have to be laissez-faire with it and say, okay, you got it, player. You the smartest person in the room. I do that with my son a lot these days. I say, oh, you think you know better than me. You've been here 8 years. I've been here 42. Your mother's been here 37. But yet, for whatever reason, you think you know better than either one of us. So, okay, you got it. And one of the things I say to him, I'm like, okay, you the smartest person in the room. And then you gotta sometimes watch him fall on his face, figuratively, sometimes literally, in order for him to learn that lesson. But sometimes you gotta put in a little bit more work in order to protect your child. And if it means you incur a lot of that pain, it's what comes with the job of parenthood. And that's one of the things that I've realized in my experience being a father. I've not always gotten it right. I've not always been the best possible role model for my son that I could be. But the bottom line is that my intention is always to do right by him. My intention is not just to do better than what my father did with me, but do accordingly to what my son requires. My son is special. My son, it's hard for me to even explain, but I just think of the fact that my son is a ray of sunshine. Like, he wakes up sunny. He wakes up happy. He wakes up with a smile on his face. Like, he wakes up ready to go. He has a certain level of energy that I never had as a kid. As happy as I was as a kid, I never had his level of happy. He could go through a certain amount of emotions. One minute he could be crying, he could be mad, he could be whatever. But maybe a few minutes later, he goes back to the default. And I have to realize that this is the type of kid that I have, and I have to love him, and I have to regard him, and I have to treat him a certain way so that I don't dim his light, but that I help it to shine even brighter, that I help him to be even better than what he even sees for himself. That's my role as his dad. And that's the job that I took on the moment that my wife said that she was pregnant. I understood the assignment, and I live every day to do better at that assignment because it's an assignment from God. And if I don't do right by my son, if I don't rear him in a certain way, if I don't sow certain seeds of wisdom, of love, of life, of joy, of peace into him, of intelligence, of spirituality, then I'm failing as his father. And I'll be darned if I'm gonna do that. Because too many of us in our communities have done that. And what my son will not be is a statistic. If anything, he is going to buck any kind of trends that the media, mainstream society will assume about somebody who looks like him. He's going to be one of the greats. And that's going to be because of me as his father and my wife as his mother. And my wife has been awesome when it comes to raising this little boy. People always praise how intelligent he is, how bright he is, how well-mannered he is. So many different aspects of who he is. And I credit so much of that to my wife. Spending the first 5 years of his life with him, staying at home, sacrificing, working, sacrificing so many different things in order for him to be prepared. And she still does it. Even while she's in nursing school, she still sacrifices so much for him because of everything that she did in order to bring him into this world. It's not enough to bring a child into the world. You have to really bring them into the world and what that means, and shape them and mold them and guide them in a certain way so that they can be the best person they possibly can be and better than that. And that's where I'm going to leave it. And I thank everybody for all of your support of this single. I thank everybody for all of the kind words that y'all have given for specifically for the vertical video that's out. It meant a lot to me to put that video out for my son, to celebrate who he is, to celebrate his personality, and just to honor him and show him like, look, you are an awesome child and I appreciate you and I love you. And I appreciate everybody for all of your support. And if you don't have my latest single, Jason's Lyric, featuring Michael Jalil, that I've been talking about for the past 3 episodes, please make sure that you get the single. And in the same place where you can get that single, which is back with Rolling Blackout, you can get this gear that you see on me right now. This is something that I advertise on Instagram. The Batch hat, the Batch Dad hat, this t-shirt is definitely on there. You can get this stuff, the music, the merch, same place, BAMMLLC.net. Once again, BAMMLLC.net. Get the music, get the merch. If you get the music, you can connect to your favorite streaming site if you are more of a streaming person. But I always encourage people to buy it. You can buy it from my website, or you can connect to Bandcamp from my website, or you can connect directly to Bandcamp if you are more of a Bandcamp person, and that is ajthrowback.bandcamp.com. Once again, ajthrowback.bandcamp.com. If this is your first time checking out any of my material right here on YouTube, please make sure that you like, comment, share, and of course subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hit that bell notification so whenever I go live, post a new video, premiere a new video, you'll be among the first to know. And thank you if this was your first time watching. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hope to see you back. And if you're not already following me on social media, please do so. I follow back as long as you on the up and up. Facebook, Twitter, at AJ_Throwback, and on Instagram and TikTok, it is at A.J.Throwback. Next week, this is going to be a first here on the Maximum Sentence. I am going to be having a conversation with my brother, Mike Mountain, who has a brand new single out, or that's been out for about a month now, called Traviesa. And it's actually a song that I produced, my first reggaeton song that I've ever produced. I'm going to be interviewing him and breaking down some of those lyrics with him. So it's a first because it's a song that I'm not a part of in terms of the lyrics, but I am a part of in terms of the production. But I wanted to bring my brother on so you could showcase him and really talk about this song. And if you don't have that song, Traviesa, you can find that on all digital streaming platforms. Traviesa, Traviesa, by Mike Mountain. That's M-I-C Mountain, just like it sounds. So definitely go get that single if you don't have it already. And yeah, until next week, I've been your man AJ Throwback, and I want to thank each and every last one of you for supporting the music, supporting the merch, and of course supporting the Maximum Sentence, where there's conviction behind the bars. Until next week, y'all enjoy the rest of your weekend, and y'all be easy. Peace.
You're a miracle of life for life.
Took a little time for you to get here, so please won't you stay a while, so I can marvel at the way you grow.